This is the studio session of the Budapest Global Dialogue 2025, and it is my honor to moderate this panel focusing on the present and future of the Indo-Hungarian relations, entitled as Danube to the Ganges. This relationship stands as a testament to enduring friendship, shared values, and mutual respect. And I do very much remember that we just recently celebrated the 75th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Hungary and India 2 years ago. Let me welcome and introduce our two distinguished panelists for this session. On my right side is Rami Desai, a distinguished fellow from the India Foundation. And we have here with us Márton Ugrósdi, Deputy State Secretary, Cabinet Office of the Prime Minister, and my name is László Csicsman, Senior Research Fellow at the Hungarian Institute of International Affairs and a professor. My first question is a very general one, which is about the shifting international order. So experts frequently say that the Cold War era represented a time when India, Hungary, and other Central Eastern European states shared geopolitical interest, thereby enhancing economic and political cooperation. But with the conclusion of the Cold War, it's a period of, I would say, geopolitical divergence, because Hungary is much more focused on the Euro-Atlantic integration, while India much more focused on its neighborhood and Southeast Asia with its Look East policy. And the question is, in light of the current tectonic shifts within the international system, do you anticipate a renewed geopolitical convergence, alignment between India and Hungary? And what are the primary challenges and prospects for cooperation in this evolving international order?
You let me just start. Well, I think India and Hungary, like you said, we've had such a long relationship, and I think it's based on something greater, which is a lot of cultural commonalities, the way we've seen history, the way we have foundational familial values. But having said that, yes, this is, the world is changing and it's changing swiftly. But India has always had its foreign policy has been based on non-alignment, which has now, with a multipolar world, transformed into a multi-alignment movement. And I think that has served India well. So it's not just about, of course, we focus on India's neighborhood. We have the Look West policy, we have the Act East policy, but we also realize that there are countries that have many commonalities with us, like Hungary, that need to be brought closer, whether it is through trade, whether it is through commerce, whether it is through tourism. And I think in the changing world order, this sort of strategic autonomy, non-alignment, multilateralism is going to play a very big role. And I think Hungary also practices the same. It's been part of certain blocs, yet its national interest has driven its foreign policy, similar to India. And I think that is going to be a great foundation for the two countries.
Thanks. Deputy State Secretary Ugrósdi.
It's really hard to compare the two countries because we're so different when it comes to size. But I think the fundamental approach is the same because both of us think about ourselves as a civilizational state. India has a clear vision of where it stands right now, where it wants to go, and how it's going to get there. And it has an enormous potential, 1.5 billion people, an enormous and wonderfully developing economy, and a very interesting and challenging neighborhood. Whereas Hungary's geopolitical situation is much more different. We're part of the EU, we're part of NATO, and as long as the war in Ukraine hasn't escalated to the level that we're seeing today, this was a relatively safe part of the world. However, the Hungarian government shares this very basic assumption that our policies should be dictated by the national interest and nothing else. And that's a very good starting point when we are conducting our relationship with India, because we can be honest with each other. That this is what our national interest is, this is where they align, this is where they don't, and then we can have a meaningful conversation on all these issues. And to be very honest, you cannot have these kind of conversations with all your partners these days, especially not in Europe.
Absolutely.
And this is a very good foundation. And then the question becomes that how we build on this foundation, how we transform this kind of a trust and mutual understanding into concrete projects, cooperation in tourism, investment, R&D, you name it. So I think the foundation is there, the willingness from both sides is there. Now comes the boring part of the work, which is the projects, implementation, and everything else.
Yeah.
Thanks. I think it's a very important point what mentioned, that especially that both countries are civilizational states. Let me continue with my second question, which is more pragmatic, that in our neighborhood we have the Ukraine war, and I think both India and Hungary calling for an end of this war. So what kind of cooperation can you see in peace-building activities in our neighborhood, where India is playing an active role, and Hungary, of course, is very active in that?
I think primarily India has always been in at least our neighborhood and also in other countries first responders to any sort of disaster. We've just seen recently in Myanmar as well. We were literally within the first 24 hours, our healthcare systems, our boots were on the ground, responding to the massive destructive earthquake that Myanmar saw. And I think that has been the case across the world. So I think, with India's robust emergency services, our extremely capable healthcare, I think that is a meeting point where Hungary and India can come together. Almost, I would like to say that there could be joint cooperation in not just asking for a humanitarian corridor, so as to say, to supply aid, but also to have some amount of, to have some amount of commonality in understanding the fact that we could jointly push for, mediation. Hungary and India is, both countries, like you said, is a civilizational state. We understand the larger dynamics of the world. We see it as circular challenges. And therefore, I think it makes us in a great position to really call for mediation.
Thank you.
Ironically enough, and not a lot of people remember that, when the war in Ukraine broke out in 2022, that really brought our two countries together because we organized the evacuation of tens of thousands of Indian students from the areas which were impacted by the war. And I still remember, I live in a part of Budapest where the planes inbound for the Budapest airport are landing, and I was looking up and said that, hey, what our Indian jets are doing here? This once again showed that when it comes to emergency responses, when it comes to dealing with the unexpected events in our neighborhoods, we can count on each other. And I think this is a very good experience that enables us to go even further than that. Of course, one of the biggest challenges we face around the war in Ukraine is that what is it really about? Is it about two countries fighting each other? Is it about something bigger like the European security architecture? Is it about how the world's going to look like when the war is going to be over? And I think, especially in these fields, there are serious conversations that we must have. And we must have these conversations with countries and actors which are not part of our region. They're not part of this mythology that we have, that how countries behave, because we need an outside check. And we need a rational approach, we need a realist approach to all these questions. And India has been struggling with the same challenges ever since it became independent, and even before that. So I think on that account, there's quite a lot we can do on the theoretical part. And I know it sounds boring because it's theory and it's scholars coming together doing conferences. But the Indian experience could be very inspiring when it comes to how you can provide and how you can establish different kind of security architectures, multidimensional, multipolar cooperations with your neighbors and even the great powers which are involved in your region to make your own place more safer, more prosperous, and more promising for the future. So this is one thing. And the second thing is, which might be a bit further down the way, is that what happens when there's going to be a ceasefire or, God helps, a peace agreement in Ukraine? Who's going to keep the peace? Is it going to be the UN? Is it going to be someone else? Who is going to give the mandate for that? Who's going to deploy the troops? Because with all the respect to some of our European friends, it's quite obvious that Russia will not tolerate NATO troops in Ukraine, because this is why the war started 3 years ago. So we need third parties who are independent, who are neutral, and then we have to look a bit further than we usually look. And maybe then on that point in time, with lots of uncertainties, we can look at India, we can look at India's friends, we can look at India's partners, for example, who would be able to help us to dissolve this conflict in the long run.
Yeah, please.
But, I must agree with you, India has been in peculiar positions many times before historically, even if you look at the recent conflict in its neighborhood, whether it is Bangladesh, whether it is Myanmar, there have been multiple stakeholders, whether it's the rebellion groups, or whether it is the interim governments, or whether it is the armed forces in countries like Myanmar. During times of crisis and even during times of peace, India has been in a very spectacular, special position, and has taken those special decisions to be able to reach out to all stakeholders. And I think that is very important, because as we believe in non-interference, we don't appreciate interference within our own internal politics, nor do we encourage interference in others' issues. Therefore, to play this pragmatic role is something that we have a certain amount of experience in.
But let me rephrase this very bluntly.
Yes, please.
You're one of the few great powers out there who can literally talk to anybody. And you don't have a lot of countries like that left. We had Switzerland, it's over. We had Sweden, it's over. We had Norway, it's
Correct.
over. I mean, you literally don't have that many heads of states and government who can invite all these people in a place where they can talk to each other. And with all the respect to everybody else out there, I mean, if I look at the track record of Foreign Minister Jaishankar, for example, he's on talking terms with everybody, the Russians, the Ukrainians alike. And you could list maybe 2 or 3 other foreign ministers who's capable of doing this right now.
Fair enough. Yes, I accept that as a compliment.
Thanks. And this is, I think, really the most important points. India has a very special position in those conflicts. Just we can mention even the Iran-Israel issue at the very moment. So it has a very careful approach of the situation. Let me continue with another question. EU and India is getting closer, especially they are very close to sign a free trade agreement, which I can very positive, especially regarding the Hungarian Indian relations as well. How do you see the potentials of connectivity, which is, I think, very important for Hungary's strategy to connect East and West, and especially here there is a very important project or opportunity, the IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. We know what's going on in the Middle East at the moment, but how do you see the opportunities of building on this triangle EU, Hungary and India relations? Please.
So, with the FTA, I have to right at the outset say this, that it took so long. There is this problem which in the panel that I was in also pointed out that, there's always this lens of some sort of human rights or, other situations like this that India has always looked upon, and that delays everything else. I'm glad that we are at this point now that we're going to be signing an FTA, and I think it's very important to bring the countries together, the European Union together. There are huge amount of areas that we can collaborate on. I think when we look at Hungary really gives us the access to EU. When we talk about the automobile industry, I think you mentioned earlier on almost 50 countries. I think recently about 700 million was invested by Apollo, which almost gives employment to 800 people. And there are many other countries like this. Of course, our expertise lies in components, but it gives us the market access to EU that is very important to us. In return, I think what Hungary has is, Hungary has this very robust AI capability, this technology. I think you have over a 400-member alliance that really would help India in increasing its potential, because as you know that by 2027, right now it's an $8 billion market by 2027. We want artificial intelligence to have a $17 billion market. Having said this, the present government, which has been very forward-looking, has been very, has had a focus on encouraging startups, is heavily funding in artificial intelligence and therefore promoting startups, that have expertise in AI. And therefore, I think that's where Hungary can come in. But, it's not just automobiles. I think that is a great place to start. It's also, EVs also. Again, you guys have this kind of expertise in EVs. And India is one of the largest markets. And I see, as a common person, I see more of us shifting to EVs than to petrol engines and diesel engines, especially with the problem of pollution, as everybody knows about it in urban cities in Delhi. But then, there's also the collaborations in healthcare. I think AI can really have that intervention. We have the market, we have the training, we have the skills, we have the services, and whether it's diagnostics, whether it's telediagnostics, these are areas that we can really collaborate on. So I think collaborations are, as far as we want to take them. Of course, let me say this, language may be a barrier, but I think that's not a barrier that we can't overcome. We look at, and let me just bring in my last point, we look at tourism. There isn't a bigger language barrier between India and Japan. We've increased within a year, because EU is just so difficult to enter for the Indian tourists, the kind of visa restrictions that we have and what it costs us. And then, you can reject it, Japan made visa processes easy. Within a year, tourism went up by 50%. In Hungary too, tourism has gone up by 14%. So I think there is a huge array of collaborations that we can have. I think the efforts have to be determined. I think we have to have some amount of collaborative councils that work on AI and what our meeting points can really be.
I think when it comes to tangible on-the-ground cooperation, one of the initial issues we have to overcome is the size of India, if I can put it that way. That, for a small and medium Hungarian enterprise, looking at the Indian market, it's so big, it's so complicated, it's so unknown, it's really hard to persuade them to even look at it. And notwithstanding the physical distance, for now, at the moment, the lack of direct flights, which will be resolved later this year. So it's not easy. But you're absolutely right that in certain areas where we have special expertise, AI, pharma, for example, and a bunch of other fields, we could have niche areas where we could get a jump start to the cooperation. Of course, you have to determine that where are those benefits which justify the involvement of both countries, both from the political and the business sector. But this is the way to go. And obviously, we're just too small to provide everything for the market in India, but there are some parts of the market in India that we can supply, and we have to find those openings, and we have to work that out and incentivize Hungarian companies to move in. The second point you mentioned was tourism. I think it's very, very important, and it's a significant part of the Hungarian economy. And since we've been open to everybody around the world, Americans, Chinese, Japanese, Indians, Singaporeans, and Brazilians alike, and people fortunately like to come here because this is a nice place. There's great potential in that. And the more direct connections we have with Indian cities, the better. And you're right that the visa application could be easier. This is something that we can blame on the European Union because...
Absolutely.
But this is not a good enough excuse, because if Europe is to survive when it comes to its tourism sector, it has to embrace India much better. Final thoughts on IMEC. We're having a panel on IMEC today here in the conference. But you know what struck me? When I was looking at the flight radar maps, which depicts that where the planes are flying, as soon as the Iranian airspace was closed down, where are those planes flying? The IMEC way.
Exactly.
UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, up to Europe.
That's
where
so natural backup option.
But can I just add to this?
Please.
You're absolutely right. There are these differences, but I do think, when it comes to technology transfer, when it comes to institutions, you guys have some of the greatest institutions, the Budapest Technology Institute. We have some great institutions like the IIT.
Yeah.
Robust collaborations between these two could be a starting point. And when it comes to tourism, let me say, we more often find ourselves more than not applying to Hungary because Hungary makes our lives easier. And therefore, it should not be a transit city. It should be our first preference to come to.
I hope so.
Thank you very much for Rami Desai and Márton Ugrósdi. So it was the podcast on the Hungarian-Indian relations, and we are very much hope when we celebrate the 80th anniversary, we can talk about more milestone in our relations. I'm pretty sure about that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.